77 days. That number is burned into my skull like a brand on cattle. People ask me about Vietnam, and they want to hear about firefights, about jungle patrols, about helicopters and napalm. But what haunts me, what still wakes me up at 3 in the morning with my sheets soaked through, is not a single moment of violence. It is 77 days of waiting to die underground while the earth itself tried to bury us alive. I have never told this story properly. Not to my wife, God rest her soul. Not to my children. Not to the nice lady at the VA who keeps asking me to join a support group. For 50 years, I carried Khe Sanh inside me like a splinter working its way toward my heart. And maybe now, at the end of things, I need to let it out before it kills me. You want to know what hell sounds like? It sounds like silence between explosions. 1, 2, 3. Boom. You learn to count. You learn that 3 seconds means the next round is coming from the same position. 5 seconds means they are adjusting. 10 seconds and you start to hope, you start to breathe, and then boom, and you realize hope is just another way to suffer. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I was young and stupid and thought I knew what war was. I grew up in a little town in Ohio that you have never heard of and never will. Cornfields in every direction, a main street with a hardware store and a diner, and not much else. My father worked at the feed mill. My mother kept house and sang in the church choir. I was the middle child, which meant I was invisible most of the time, and that was fine by me. I played baseball in the summers and hunted rabbits in the fall, and figured I would take over the mill someday and marry a girl from town and die in the same bed I was born in. The draft notice came in October of 1967. I remember my mother crying at the kitchen table, and my father sitting there with this look on his face like he had swallowed something bitter. He had been in Korea, my old man, and he never talked about it, not once. But that day he looked at me and said, "Son, keep your head down and do not volunteer for anything." That was all the advice he gave me. At the time I thought he was being dramatic. Now I understand he was telling me how to survive. Boot camp was at Paris Island, and if you have been there, you know what I am talking about. Those drill instructors broke us down to nothing and built us back up into something that could follow orders without thinking. I learned to shoot. I learned to march. I learned to do push-ups until my arms gave out and then do 20 more. But you know what they never taught us? They never taught us what it feels like when your best friend's blood is on your hands and you cannot remember if you said goodbye. They never taught us how to sleep when the ground shakes. They never taught us how to drink Radiator water and be grateful for it. I landed in Da Nang in January of 1968, right before Tet. The heat hit me like a wall when they opened that plane door. Humid, thick, and this smell I cannot describe even now. It was rotting vegetation and diesel fuel and something else, something sweet and wrong that I later learned was death. The smell of bodies in the jungle, the smell that gets into your clothes and your hair and never really comes out no matter how many times you shower. They put me on a C-130 and flew me up north to Khe Sanh Combat Base. Now, you have to understand what Khe Sanh was. It was a plateau in the northwest corner of South Vietnam, right near the Laotian border and about 14 miles from the DMZ. Strategically important, they told us, because it could interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail and provide a base for operations into Laos. That was the official reason. The real reason, as far as us grunts understood it, was that the brass wanted a fight, and the NVA was happy to give them one. The base sat on a red dirt airstrip surrounded by hills. Those hills would become our nightmare. Hill 881 South, Hill 881 North, Hill 861, and others. The NVA had been building up forces around us for months, and we knew something was coming. You could feel it in the air, that electric tension before a storm breaks. But nothing prepared us for what actually happened. I got there on January 18th. 2 days later, the siege began. It started at midnight 30 on January 21st, 1968. I was asleep in my bunker when the first rockets hit. The sound was unlike anything I had experienced in training. Not just loud, but physical. It hit you in the chest like a punch. I remember rolling off my cot and hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me, and then the next round hit closer, and the ground bucked like a living thing. Our ammunition dump went up. 1,500 tons of explosives cooking off at once. The fireball lit up the night like daylight. I could feel the heat on my face from 200 meters away. The shockwave collapsed bunkers, ruptured eardrums, and for a moment I thought the whole base was dying around me. Tear gas and CS powder from our own stores drifted across the position, and men were stumbling around blind and choking, trying to find their weapons, trying to find cover. That first night, we took over 1,000 incoming rounds. 1,000! And that was just the beginning. Let me tell you about the bunkers, because that is where we lived for the next 77 days. They were holes in the ground, really, covered with timber and sandbags and anything else we could pile on top. Some were reinforced with runway matting, that steel planking they used for the airstrip. Mine was about 6 feet deep and maybe 10 feet long by 8 feet wide. I shared it with 5 other guys, and we stacked sandbags until the overhead was maybe 3 feet thick. We thought that was enough. We were wrong. The NVA had artillery, real artillery, not just mortars and rockets. They had 130-millimeter guns and 152-millimeter howitzers positioned in Laos where we could not touch them, and they dropped rounds on us around the clock. Day and night, there was no safe time. You could be eating breakfast, if you could call it that, and suddenly the world would explode. You could be sleeping, trying to sleep, and the concussion would slam you awake. After a while, you stopped flinching at the explosions. Your body just could not maintain that level of fear. It was not bravery, it was exhaustion. The bunker became our world. 6 men in a space meant for 3, with no room to stand up straight. The smell was indescribable. Sweat, unwashed bodies, fear, urine, because sometimes you could not make it to the latrine. We had a bucket in the corner for emergencies. The emergencies became constant. I lost 15 pounds in those 77 days, and I was not a big guy to begin with. You asked about the Radiator water. Yeah, that was real. Water became precious fast. The NVA targeted our water point, and supply helicopters could not always get through. When you are that desperate, you drink whatever you can find. We drained the radiators of vehicles that had been destroyed, strained it through our shirts, and pretended it was not coolant. I know some guys got sick from it. I know at least one died, not from enemy fire, but from drinking something his body could not process. But when your lips are cracked and your tongue is swelling and you have not had water in 2 days, you drink what is available. You drink and you hope. Food was sea rations when we had them, and half rations when we did not. I ate beans and franks cold from the can because heating them meant making smoke, and smoke meant giving the snipers a target. Everything tasted like metal and fear. I dropped my fork once and did not bother to pick it up, just scooped the food with my fingers like an animal. We were becoming animals. That is what siege does to you. It strips away the civilized parts until only the survival instinct remains. The worst part was not the shelling. The worst part was the waiting between the shelling. You see, human beings can adapt to almost anything. Even constant bombardment becomes a kind of background noise after a while. What we could not adapt to was the uncertainty. Would this shell hit our bunker? Would the next one? The NVA varied their patterns deliberately. Sometimes they would hit us with 1,000 rounds in an hour. Sometimes they would go quiet for 6 hours and let us think maybe it was over. Then they would start again, and the hope that had crept in would die, and dying hope is worse than no hope at all. I watched men break. Strong men, brave men, guys who I would have followed anywhere. One corporal from Texas, big guy, used to be a rodeo rider. He just stood up one day and walked out of the bunker into the open. We screamed at him to get down, but he kept walking, slowly, like he was taking a Sunday stroll. A sniper got him before he made it 20 meters. I do not know if he wanted to die or if his mind had simply stopped working. Maybe there is no difference. Another guy, I will call him Pete because that was not his name, and I do not want his family to read this. Pete started talking to people who were not there. He would have whole conversations with his mother, with his girlfriend, with a buddy who had been killed the week before. We let him do it because what else could we do? The medics were overwhelmed with wounded. There was no psychiatric care. You either held it together or you did not. And nobody judged you if you did not because we all knew we were one bad day away from the same thing. Sleep deprivation does strange things to the mind. After the first week, I started seeing things. Shadows that moved wrong. Faces in the sandbags. Once I woke up convinced that the bunker had collapsed and I was buried alive, and I clawed at the walls until my fingers bled before my buddy grabbed me and talked me down. The line between dream and reality got blurry. Sometimes I was not sure if I was awake or asleep, if the explosions were real or memories, if the year was 1968 or some other time entirely. We were supposed to be Marines, the few, the proud, all that. And we were. We held that base against everything the NVA could throw at us. But pride does not stop you from shaking. Pride does not stop the nightmares. Pride does not bring back the dead. Let me tell you about the incoming. There is a sound a rocket makes when it is coming toward you. A sort of whistle, rising in pitch, and if you hear it, you have about half a second to hit the dirt. If you do not hear it, well, you do not hear anything ever again. We developed a sense for it, almost supernatural. Your body would react before your brain caught up. One moment you would be standing, the next you would be face down in the mud without any conscious decision to move. The NVA used a mix of weapons. The 122mm rockets were the most common. They came in fast and hit hard, and they could penetrate a lot of overhead cover. The 82mm mortars were more accurate but smaller. The artillery from Laos was the worst because those 130mm and 152mm rounds could penetrate anything we had, and we could not shoot back because of the rules of engagement. Those guns were across the border, technically in neutral territory, and politics mattered more than our lives. I remember one direct hit on a bunker near mine. The round went through the overhead like it was paper. 7 Marines inside. None of them survived. We dug them out later, or what was left of them, and I cannot describe what 7 bodies look like after a high-explosive round detonates in an enclosed space. I will not describe it. Some images are not meant to be shared. Just know that I can still see it when I close my eyes, and I have been closing my eyes for 50 years. The medevac helicopters were heroes. Those pilots and crew chiefs who flew into that hell to pick up our wounded, they deserve every medal ever minted. But a lot of times they could not get in. The fire was too intense, the weather was too bad, the ceiling was too low. We had wounded men lying in the trenches for hours, for days sometimes, waiting for evacuation that might never come. The corpsmen did what they could with limited supplies. I watched a doc perform surgery with a crowbar knife because his medical kit had been destroyed. The guy he was working on survived somehow. A lot of others did not. We lost track of time. Days blurred together into one endless cycle of shelling and silence and shelling again. I stopped asking what day it was because it did not matter. The only thing that mattered was surviving until the next meal, the next water ration, the next resupply drop. We lived in increments, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. Anything more than that was too much to contemplate. The resupply drops were a special kind of terror. C-100s would come in low to drop pallets of ammunition and food and water, and the NVA would open up with everything they had. We would watch those planes take hits and keep flying, or take hits and go down, and either way we would be running across open ground to recover whatever they dropped, while rounds exploded around us. Guys died retrieving water. Guys died retrieving mail. That is how much we needed those things, not just physically, but psychologically. A letter from home could keep you going for another week. I got 3 letters during the siege, 2 from my mother, 1 from a girl I had been seeing back home. The girl's letter was a Dear John. She had met someone else. She was sorry. She hoped I would understand. I read that letter in my bunker while rockets fell around me, and I started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. Here I was, probably going to die in this hole on the other side of the world, and she was worried about hurting my feelings over a breakup. I laughed until I cried, and then I burned the letter and used the heat to warm my hands because the nights got cold up there on that plateau. My mother's letters I kept. I still have them, actually, in a box in my closet. She wrote about normal things, the weather in Ohio, my younger sister's wedding plans, the new pastor at church. Normal things that felt like they came from another planet. I would read those letters and try to remember what normal felt like, and I could not. Normal was a foreign concept. Normal was for people who had not spent 3 weeks underground counting explosions. The bunkers flooded when it rained. The plateau had that red clay soil that held water, and when the monsoons came through, our holes filled up. We bailed with helmets, with empty ammo cans, with our bare hands. It did not matter. The water kept coming. I slept in 6 inches of muddy water more than once, curled up on a pile of sandbags that was barely above the surface. Trench foot was common. Guys lost toes. Guys lost feet. Infections spread fast in those conditions. And the rats. God, the rats. They came out of nowhere once the siege started, attracted by the garbage and the bodies we could not bury properly. Big ones, fat ones, fearless ones that would crawl over you while you slept. I woke up one night with a rat sitting on my chest, staring at me with those black eyes, and I was too tired to even brush it off. We just looked at each other for a long moment, 2 creatures trying to survive in a place designed to kill us both. Then it scurried away, and I went back to sleep. That is what exhaustion does. You stop caring about things that would have horrified you before. The hill fights were happening simultaneously. While we held the main base, Marines on the surrounding hills were engaged in brutal close combat. Hill 881 South took heavy attacks. Hill 861 nearly fell. We could hear the fighting sometimes, the crack of small arms and the heavier thump of grenades, and we knew guys were dying up there while we were dying down here. It was a strange kind of solidarity. We were all in it together, even if we were miles apart. I went outside the bunker exactly twice during the entire siege, both times for resupply runs, and both times I did not think I would make it back. The ground out there was churned mud and crater holes and unexploded ordnance. You could not run in a straight line because the snipers were zeroed in on all the obvious routes. You zigzagged, you crawled, you prayed to whatever god you believed in. The first time I was going for water. We had information that a pallet had landed near the eastern perimeter, and my bunker drew the short straw to retrieve it. I ran out with 2 other guys, and within seconds the mortars started. I hit the ground and covered my head and listened to the rounds walk across the base. One of the guys with me, a kid from New Jersey, he took shrapnel in the leg and could not move. I had to drag him to cover while the rounds kept falling. We made it to a shell crater and huddled there for 2 hours until the barrage lifted. Then we crawled back with whatever water we could carry. The whole trip was maybe 200 meters. It felt like 100 miles. The second time was worse, but I do not want to talk about that right now. We knew relief was coming. We heard the rumors, the radio traffic, the promises from higher command. Operation Pegasus was going to break through and end the siege. The first air cavalry was on its way. Just hold on a little longer. We held on. We held on through things that should have broken us, and then we held on some more because there was no alternative. Surrender was not an option. Retreat was impossible. We were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and the only thing we had was each other and the stubborn refusal to die. The NVA tried ground assaults too, not just artillery. They probed our perimeter at night, looking for weak points. Sometimes they found them. I was not on the line during any of the major assaults, but I heard them. The firing would start suddenly, M16S and M60S and grenades and screaming, and you would lie in your bunker and listen and wonder if the line was going to hold or if this was the night they would break through. They never broke through. Those Marines on the perimeter were some of the bravest men I have ever known. They fought off waves of attacks in conditions that would have routed any other force. Sleep-deprived, starving, terrified, they stood their ground and killed and died and held. I was not one of them. I was support, a rear echelon guy in the grand scheme of things, and I feel guilty about that even now. They were the real heroes. I was just trying to survive. The siege officially ended on April 8, 1968, 77 days after it began. Operation Pegasus broke through from the east, and the NVA melted back into the jungle the way they always did. I remember the first Army helicopters landing on the airstrip, and the faces of those soldiers looking at us like we were ghosts. Maybe we were. We certainly did not look human anymore. Hollow-eyed, filthy, 10 or 20 pounds underweight, twitching at every sudden noise. They flew me out a few days later. I walked onto that helicopter and I did not look back. I could not. If I looked back, I would have to see it all again, the bunkers and the craters and the graves we had dug, and I was not ready. I do not think I will ever be ready. The first thing I did when I got to Da Nang was take a shower. I stood under that water for an hour, maybe longer, watching the red mud swirl down the drain. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. I could not get clean. The dirt was superficial. The other stuff, the stuff that really soiled me, that did not wash off. They gave us hot food and clean beds and all the beer we could drink. I ate until I was sick, and then I ate some more. My body had forgotten what fullness felt like. I slept for 2 days straight, and when I woke up, I thought I was still at Khe Sanh. It took me a full minute to remember where I was, to realize that the silence was not the silence between barrages, that no one was going to start shelling. My hands were shaking. They would shake for months. I finished my tour and went home in December of 1968. The trip back was a blur. One day I was in Vietnam, the next I was on a commercial flight full of businessmen and families, and then I was walking through the airport in San Francisco with my uniform and my duffel bag, and people were looking at me like I was something unpleasant they had stepped in. Nobody spat on me. I know that is the cliché, the baby killer stuff, and maybe it happened to some guys, but my experience was more subtle. It was the way people avoided eye contact, the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room, the way my own family tiptoed around me like I was a bomb that might go off. I was a reminder of something the country wanted to forget, and the easiest way to forget was to pretend I did not exist. I tried to go back to normal life. I got a job at a factory. I married a girl from the next town over, a sweet woman who deserved better than what I gave her. I had kids, 2 boys, and I tried to be a good father. But part of me was still in that bunker, would always be in that bunker, counting the seconds between explosions. The nightmares came almost every night for the first 10 years. I would wake up screaming, thrashing, convinced that I was buried alive, or that the rats were eating my face, or that my buddy was bleeding out next to me and I could not stop it. My wife learned not to touch me when I was dreaming because I might hurt her without meaning to. I slept on the couch a lot. I drank more than I should have. I was not a good husband. I was not a good father. I was a ghost trying to pretend it was still alive. The VA did not know what to do with us back then. PTSD was not even a diagnosis yet. They called it shell shock, or combat fatigue, or just not adjusting well. The implication was that it was our fault, that we were weak, that real men would get over it. I bought into that for a long time. I thought the shaking and the nightmares and the inability to feel anything were character flaws. I thought I was broken because I could not be fixed. Therapy helped, eventually. It took me 20 years to walk into a VA counselor's office, and another 10 to start talking about what happened. But I am talking now. That is something. I lost touch with most of the guys from Khe Sanh. That was deliberate. Seeing them would mean remembering, and I was not ready to remember. A few of them tracked me down over the years. One guy, Johnson, he came to visit in the 90s. We sat on my porch and drank beer and did not say much. There was not much to say. We both knew. That was enough. That is my story. That is all I have.